if you squirm in your seat when you have to confront someone, if conflict drives you crazy, then stick with me here. Stay with this class, get your pen and paper out, and take notes. I'm about to give you a master class on how to have tough conversations, and I'm going to give you a process and a tool that will make them doable and will bring increase to your leadership. All right, welcome back to Increase. I'm Blake Anderson. God bless you wherever you're joining us, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Thanks for joining us. Hit the like, subscribe button. Follow along the conversation. It's another episode of Increase, episode 47. Really excited about this topic today. Today, we are going to talk about how to have tough conversations, how to increase your leadership through tough conversations. Let me ask you a few questions. How do you feel when the tough conversation has to happen? Do you shy away from the awkward moments, or do you press into them? Do you seem to have a lot of gray area floating around your work world, your leadership world? Is there disputes in your workplace? Do you have people on your team that there's disagreement, or they just continue to do things wrong? Or maybe there's something that you're unsure of with your boss and you're too afraid to ask. You see, if you want to take your leadership to a whole nother level and you want to see increase in your leadership, then you've got to learn how to have tough conversations. If you're anything like me, in the past, I was afraid to have any phone call or conversation, let alone the tough ones. I had to muster up the courage just to call someone on the phone that was not expecting me, let alone have a really uncomfortable conversation with them. I was conflict avoidant all throughout my life. And it wasn't until the last few years when I was forced to have these conversations that I learned the power of being able to have tough conversations. And I'm going to tell you what, it is a power. And there is incredible results that are on the other side of tough conversations. So if you squirm in your seat when you have to confront someone, if conflict drives you crazy, then stick with me here. Stay with this class, get your pen and paper out, and take notes. I'm about to give you a master class on how to have tough conversations, and I'm going to give you a process and a tool that will make them doable and will bring increase to your leadership. So this topic has become near and dear to my heart. As I said before, it was something that I didn't like to do. I didn't do well. And maybe it's the season I'm in or the cycle of business that I'm in, but I don't think a week goes by that I don't have 1 to 2 to 3 firm, tough conversations. And I think as you progress in your leadership and your influence, what's going to come with it is these tough conversations. It's the conversations where you have to lay it out there, where you have to look someone in the eye and confront the issue at hand to remove the uncertainty. And I tell you what, I don't love them. I've gotten really good at them, but I still don't love them. I'll tell you what, I'm not afraid of them either. I've experienced the results. I've experienced the power on the other side. And now that I've got this blueprint and this framework for it, I know exactly what to do. And when you start to get good at tough conversations, eventually you get to a point where you take pride in the fact that you're willing to have them. And when they come up, you don't resist, you don't put them off, you step right in, because you know that's what a good leader does. A good leader is willing to have the important conversations, even if there's conflict, even if they're uncomfortable, even if they're hard, because they know they have to happen to be able to move into a successful future. So let's first identify where they begin to happen. Before we jump in to how to have them, let's identify them. You know, these are the kind of things that we're hoping never have to deal with. But I would say you need to look in your life, look in your leadership, look in your business, look on your team, and see where's the gray area. First, you start by looking at where's the gray area. Where are their assumptions being made? Where is there any uncertainty about money that's promised or payments that have to be made? What are the things that you're going to hold someone accountable for? What are the things that you're going to be held accountable for? You see, those are the danger zones, aren't they? And many of us try to just skirt around them just enough to keep getting paid and happen to avoid them. But you know they're there. There's stuff going on there. That feeling of uncomfort tells you that there's something that needs to be dealt with. Because here's the problem. When you avoid these tough conversations, then you leave room for interpretation. You leave room for assumption. You leave room for mixed results, and you're rolling the dice like at a Russian roulette table. Because one day, those seeds of uncertainty are going to come back, and you're going to have to harvest them. And you're likely going to have what could be a blow up of a conversation. Because conversations get worse the longer you wait to address the issue. You see, when you're afraid to have the uncomfortable conversation, when there's assumption and there's gray area, you're giving implied approval to what the person's doing. If you got someone on your team who continues to miss the mark, continue to do things not exactly the way that you want them to do it, but you don't say anything about it, that's the same as saying good job. That's the same as saying I want more of it. If there's awkward, strained relationships, you continue to be okay with it, and you continue to then erode the confidence in the relationship, and you erode the potential of partnership as long as there's the unspoken things. When someone's unsure of their expectations, what kind of results do you think you'll get with them? How confident you think they will be in what they're doing? Have you ever had someone bring to you a project or something that they were working on only to look at it and be like, what were you doing? This isn't what I asked for. This isn't anywhere close. Why would you think I wanted it to look like this? You ever had that situation? I have. Who's at fault there? Well, it's really easy to think the person who did the work did a crappy job. But a good leader knows they have to take responsibility for all the results, because a leader's success is in the hands of their team, and the team's success is the leader's responsibility. And so if someone brings you mediocre results, guess who's responsible for it? The leader. You are. If they gave you something that you didn't want, it's because you didn't take the time to have the awkward conversation, the clear conversation about what you expected and what you wanted it to be like. You know, some of you are avoiding the conversation because you're conflict avoidant. You're afraid to hold someone accountable. Some of you are just avoiding the conversation because you didn't think that you had to. You thought because you hired them and their job expectation says they must do it and they're getting paid to do it, that of course they're going to do it excellent. And so therefore you shouldn't have to tell them. But how fun is that conversation when you've got to hold someone accountable, when you've got to tell them that you're not going to accept their work, when you got to tell them that this was a wasted effort, that this isn't good enough. Those aren't fun. I'll tell you what, as bad as the awkward conversation is about expectations, what's even worse is an argument when something's finished and someone invested a lot of their time and energy into it. Leader, you've got to own it. The result is your responsibility. And I know why you're avoiding it. It's awkward. It seems to take away from the relationship. You're afraid to have it when there's momentum going in the right way and everybody's got the warm and fuzzies. When we're all getting along so well and we're high-fiving at our hard work, you're afraid to have the hard conversation, but you're setting yourself up for disaster. Success is not guaranteed at that point. You know, there's people on your teams, they might be trying their best and still failing. And if someone's trying their best and still failing to meet expectation, then it might be time to look yourself in the mirror and say, what conversations have I been too afraid to have? Because I've been getting results that I don't want, and I want to see better results. So let's dig into this. How do we make these hard conversations not so hard? I want to make this easy on you. I'm going to give you a process that works every single time. There still may be arguments. There still may be disagreements. But when you have a process, you don't avoid these conversations, you press into them. Because you know the best thing that can happen for your success is that everybody's clear on what the goal is and everybody's clear on who's responsible for what. And we would never want to do anything if there's any uncertainty amongst the team. Whether that team is employees, whether that is a relationship you have with your boss, whether that's with a client or it's with a vendor, you need clarity every step of the way, all throughout the transaction in your team. And we've got to ensure it even if there's a awkward conversation. The other thing I would remind you is if you haven't had tough conversations with people, you don't know how strong your relationship with them really is. You'll never know the strength of a relationship until it's tested, until it's put under pressure. And I'm going to tell you what, the people that I'm closest with, that I've remained closest with over the years are the people who I've had the disagreements with, the people that I've had the arguments with, the people that I've had to work through these tough conversations with. Because what happens on the other side when we find agreement, when we work through what's really bothering us and we see that we still mean well and we're still committed to the same result, we have a newfound commitment to each other because we know what they're made out of and we know how they feel about us and we know we can trust them. You see, trust is actually built through tough conversations. I know that you're not wanting to jeopardize the trust that you have with someone, so you're not having these conversations. I'm telling you, trust is built through tough conversations when you know how to have them well. All right. Get out your pen and your paper. I'm going to give you a process. I'm going to give you a tool. You're going to start having success and you're going to start looking for these conversations because you know what happens on the other side of it. So we're going to give you a situation. You got a tough conversation coming up. Let's say there's you feel like someone on your team is not living up to the standard. They haven't been meeting the expectation. And maybe that's your boss, or maybe that is an employee or a direct report. The process is still the same. Okay. First thing you do before you have this conversation, maybe even before you schedule the conversation, is you need to take the time to collect your thoughts. Do not go into these conversations half-cocked and upset. Don't go into the conversation, emotions flaring, just he said, she said. Trust me, that conversation won't go anywhere, won't amount to anything, except for you run the risk of destroying all the trust and goodwill that you have built with this person. So before you go into the conversation, you need to be calm, you need to be collected, you need to create an agenda. And I've got 7 questions, 7 things that you need to assess that will help you collect your thoughts so that when you go into this conversation, it's methodical, it's productive, it's clear, and you leave feeling like you've been heard and that you have a pathway forward. Okay? Question number 1, you want to ask yourself, what is my desired result here? What do I hope happens as a result of this? What do I want to see? What does success look like in this conversation? Are you just going to fire the person? Or are you hoping that they will see your way, get in line, and move forward? Do you want them to quit? Or do you want them to take responsibility for their actions and commit to your expectations? What is your desired result? Number 2, you need to list your grievances, your issues clearly. Make a list of the exact situations, circumstances, and instances, anything that you can remember about what is said. And I would try to group them into just a few categories. If you overwhelm someone with grievances and you just pile it on them, they might either fight you or check out. Fight, flight, or freeze, but it won't be productive. List out the grievances and the issues, create about 2 or 3 bullet points that they all fit with under so that they can be specifically mentioned and you can go back to them throughout the conversation. See, throughout the conversation, when you're starting to air your grievances, don't be surprised if the other person starts to get on edge, maybe offended, maybe wants to blame, shift blame, and you're going to need to have concrete things to continue to bring them to because it won't be productive if it's he said, she said. Third thing, You need to list your personal responsibility in the situation. What are you responsible for? Whether you did it right or you did it wrong, you need to be very clear about what your responsibilities are. And you need to assess your performance. You cannot ask them to be honest about their performance if you're not prepared to be honest about yours. Okay? And you've got to be willing to own and take responsibility for your behavior and the things that you've done. Even if you've missed the mark, you've got to be able to be clear. Okay? So list your personal responsibilities and what you are responsible for, the good, the bad, the ugly, for yourself. Fourth thing, what commitments will you need from them moving forward? What commitments are you going to need from them moving forward if you guys are going to move forward into a successful future? Fifth, what are you willing to commit to? If you're going to be asking them for their commitment, then you're going to have to be willing to make a commitment. It's only fair that you commit if you're asking for their commitment. So what do you need from them? What are you willing to do going forward? Sixth, you need to know in advance, are there any deal breakers here? Is there anything that they could say or be unwilling to do that would be a deal breaker? Because they might ask you that. Okay. And then the final thing is, what are you hopeful for? Okay. What is possible if the corrections are made and you can find alignment together? Have a hopeful future for success if you guys are willing to move forward together with your commitments. Okay. You've answered these 7 questions. You're starting to feel very clear about the situation. Now the situation really isn't even uncomfortable because it's no longer just emotions swirling in our head. It's no longer fireworks in our heart. Now we're starting to be collected and gathered, and we know what we need to address. Okay. Hopefully by the time you've written this list, you are excited about the conversation because you know how important it will be. So as you go into this conversation, there's 4 H's. You need to be humble, you need to be honest, and you need to be honoring. When you have the conversation, you need to be humble, you need to be honest, and you need to be honoring. You can't be prideful if you're wanting them to be willing to change. You've got to be humble. You've got to be able to see life through their lens. You've got to be able to listen. You've got to be open to receive their feedback, because it's very possible that you might even have a blind spot here. They may reveal to you things that you aren't even aware of, and you need to be humble enough to receive that. Second, you've got to be completely honest. And I would say this is challenging, but the strongest leaders can do it. Don't cover up or defend your mistakes and failures. Don't try to cover up or defend your mistakes and failures. You don't want them to defend their misbehavior, so don't defend yours. If they call you out on something that you've done, don't defend it. The stronger leader knows how to take responsibility for it. You will gain trust in their eyes. You will be looked at as the person with power if you're willing to take responsibility for your behavior. Even if there is justification for it, that won't be the time to make the justification. The time will be to say, you're right. I take ownership of that. Honestly, I did behave that way, and that wasn't right. You've got to be honest. And then finally, you've got to be honoring. This is going to be a tough conversation. And if you don't want this to devolve into a cage match, then you're going to have to be honoring, which means you're going to have to allow the other person to speak. You're even going to have to allow them to maybe blame you and others, but you got to give them room. Don't be quick to cut them off and say, you're wrong. Oh, no, you're wrong. Oh, that's not right. No, you need to be honoring. Give them room to air their grievances. Give them room to defend themselves. But then always redirect back to the point of conversation. Try to avoid having these tangential arguments about things that aren't related. Even if they want to go off on a tangent, after they're done speaking, redirect them back to the point. See, when you have your agenda and you've got your list made, then it's very easy to redirect back to the point of conversation, back to the issues that need to be addressed, back to the commitments that you require for them. So you need to posture yourself. Your way to have this conversation is you've got to be humble, honest, and honoring. Humble, honest, and honoring. Now, let me give you a format. Let me give you a format for the conversation, and this works every time. This works whether you're having a good conversation or a bad conversation, but you need to structure the conversation in this particular way. So you're humble, honest, and honoring in your heart. Now, there's a specific agenda in this conversation, and you need to do it in this order. And really, this is the 3 E's of leadership, but we're using this inside the tool of a tough conversation. So the first thing you need to do when you sit down with the person, you don't just jump right into, I got a bone to pick. You're busted. It's not going to go anywhere good. If you want this conversation to end well and a commitment to a successful future, you need to start by empathizing. You've got to reach a heart, person-to-person level. And so you need to empathize with the person. How are you doing? How's your family? How was your lunch? How was your vacation? Reach a human-to-human level with the person. Even if you don't trust them, even if you're somewhat fuming inside, you've got to dismantle some of the edge that you guys are bringing into the conversation with empathy. Second, you need to encourage them. Okay? I know you're coming to correct them, but you got to start by encouraging them, right? When you encourage someone, the best way to do it is you want to acknowledge their contribution to the team, and you need to recognize their gifts and skill sets. Okay? Acknowledge their contribution and the importance of it. Recognize their gifts and skill set. They've got to know that you see them, that you see their value. Because if you just start jumping into correction, they're going to feel like you don't even see them and you don't value them, and they're likely not going to listen. But when they know and they've heard and they know that you understand them, that you see that they have something to contribute, that they have value, that they are important, then they're going to be willing to listen to your feedback, because from that lens, they understand your feedback is really to help them be successful. But if you don't recognize their value and you don't affirm their gifts, then they're likely going to think that you don't see that they have something to bring to the table, that you're just trying to tear them down. So you empathize. Got to reach this level. It may take a couple minutes, it may take a couple seconds, but don't rush past that. First, you got to emphasize. Second, you got to encourage. Recognize their contribution, right? Recognize their gifts. And then finally, the third E is equip. Now, when things are well, equipping is the time that you would teach someone something new. Equipping is really when you're dealing with behavior, okay? This time, the behavior we're dealing with is misbehavior, and it must be corrected. You see, if you don't correct misbehavior, then you're giving approval to it. All right. So we're going to correct misbehavior. Now, one thing I should have mentioned before is this should not be done over text. This should not be done over email. The more intense of a conversation it is, the more intense a relationship you have with someone, you should try to do it in person. If you can't do it in person, then do it on a video call or do it over the phone. But corrections should not be delivered through email and through text. They need to be done where you can hear each other's tone of voice. You can ideally see each other in the eyes. Okay? So when you're going to begin to correct them, and you're going to start working through the list of things that I've given you, right? And really what we're wanting to do with this correction, after we've talked about the things that need to be dealt with, is we're going to establish expectations. So you've empathized, you've encouraged them, now you're correcting them, okay? After the correction has been made, you've identified the problem, you're making the correction, then you do not leave the conversation without establishing expectations. Each person needs to leave the conversation knowing what's expected of them. Okay? So that means you're going to ask them for a commitment to a certain result and a certain tactic. So if you need a project done on time, let's say someone's missing their deadlines over and over and over again, you don't leave the conversation just saying you've been missing deadlines. You've got to say, how are we going to do this going forward? Here is my expectation. I want to see you meet the deadlines. And you're going to need their commitment. I would not assume that just because you told them that that will be enough to get a different result. You need to ask them, is this something that you are willing and can commit to? You need them to say yes. If they can't say yes, then you've got to talk through with them and address what their issues and saying yes. What is their apprehension? But you need their commitment. And finally, a commitment to a different result is not enough either. You need to hear a plan of tactics. You need to know the exact strategy. How are you going to do that? What is the strategy that's different? If we keep doing the same things, we'll get the same results. And doing the same things, but just doing them harder, will likely just continue to get more of the same results. It will take a different level of thinking, a different level of behavior to get a different set of results. And so you need to ask them, what tactics are you going to use? Okay, results and tactics. We get their commitment. Now we need to address consequences. Everybody's got to be very clear about how we move forward going here and what the expectation is and what happens if we don't meet the expectation and what happens if we do. They need to know, like, is this final warning? If you don't get it right, you're fired. Or if you don't get it right, you're going to get a demotion. Or if you don't get it right, we're going to move you to another position. What is the consequences here? They need to know very clearly. There should be no gray area left after this. They need to know when they walk away, if I don't perform, then this will happen and I should expect it. I had a very tough conversation with someone on my team not long ago. And I was very clear about what my expectation was. And the consequence I told them was, this is the final straw. If this happens again, you'll be terminated. And I want to be very clear about my expectations to the point that, if this were to happen, that you're expecting my call and the phone to ring any minute now, and you'll know exactly what I'll be saying. There is no uncertain terms here. Now, I then in the conversation talked about the positive consequences, because hopefully if they do make a decision to make a change, that there's positive consequences. And what I told this person is, this is a much needed skill set on our team. And there is room for so much growth here. Growth in this team, growth in your income, growth in your leadership. And if you will make these changes, not only will you save your role, you'll see growth in your role, because it is a much needed skill set for what we're doing. So there were positive consequences. All right, so we empathized, we encouraged them, we made the correct, we equipped them by making the correction, we communicated clear expectation through commitment of results and tactics, we let them know the consequences, the negative consequences and the positive consequences, and then you want to finish the conversation by affirming your belief for a successful future. You finish the conversation by saying, if they're not fired, if you're keeping them, if you're staying in relationship with this vendor, in your position, with this employee, hey, I believe that we can be successful together. I believe if we're on the same team and we're in alignment, that there is a future for us. I believe so much more is possible if we'll do this together with this level of commitment. It will only happen if we can commit to it. But I believe it's worth it, and I'm willing to make that commitment. You see, when you are able, when you're equipped with this format, these conversations aren't hard. You're not worried about them devolving into a cage match. There's going to be a couple uncomfortable moments when you've got to say out loud the things that you guys have been avoiding to say. But with this format, that you can work through these issues, and by the end, you can make a commitment to a successful future. And nothing strengthens a relationship like two people coming into agreement to do something together to create a successful future. How do you think that person feels about you when you end the conversation that way? They have confidence. They actually have a renewed trust in you. Even if you've had to identify things that they disagreed with you on. If you do this conversation with tact, with grace, with integrity in this format, then there's a trust. They're not worried to take your phone call the next time. They know that you're on their team. They know that you're committed to them. They know that success is possible. This format will help you in the toughest of conversations, but it's also a format that you can use when things haven't gotten so off track. See, the more that you have these conversations, the more you realize I can't allow there to be any uncertainty around me. See, anytime I so much as sense uncertainty, I'm going to call it out and speak to it because I have a format. And I know that when there is no uncertainty, that we can move together in alignment, because alignment creates cooperation and it leads to greater success. So many more things are possible when we are in alignment together, when we've removed all the fog from the situation, when we know what we're going to get paid and when we're going to get paid, when we know what's expected of us, when we know what the person who we report to is expecting and what they're willing to do in exchange. When we don't have to tiptoe around the tough conversations, you can be confident as a leader who's moving forward to a successful future. So I believe in you, leaders. I believe this will change your business and it will change your results, and you'll begin to see an increase. Join me next time, wherever you participate, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. God bless you. We'll see you next time on Increase.